Hey guys, tonight we're not trudging through some bustling jungle or peering over the railing of a noisy aquarium. Instead, you find yourself in the profound museum-hushed quiet of a fossil hall. The air is still, cool, carrying that faint mineral and dust scent of old stone and older stories. Your footsteps seem impossibly loud on the polished floor. In front of you towers the skeleton of a creature no living human has ever met. A frame of bones, frozen mid-stride, its head lifted in a silent moment that ended millions of years before you were born. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing just how far and wide this little corner of the internet can reach. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The skeleton in front of you is not a fossil of fame. It's not the star attraction with crowds pressing in, the way a Tyrannosaurus Rex commands a room. This one is a little stranger, its anatomy alien in subtle ways. The curve of the ribs, the arrangement of the toes. Once this animal knew the weight of its own body, the pull of wind, the taste of fresh water. It moved, breathed, hunted, perhaps cared for its young. But like 99.9% of all species that have ever lived, it lost its race against time. Somewhere deep in the unwritten rules of nature, there's a hidden timer ticking for every living thing. Not just for you or for your neighbor's houseplant, but for every species that has ever crawled, swum, flown, or rooted itself into the ground. It's not a literal clock, ticking down with a cheerful beep at the end. It's a complex, invisible mechanism that begins the moment a species appears. A countdown to its inevitable disappearance. Dinosaurs, dodos, this skeletal stranger before you, and yes, us. It's a sobering truth, but it's not a story about despair. This is about understanding a fundamental law of life on Earth. If the individual lifespan is the candle that burns down over decades, the species' lifespan is the whole candelabra, burning more slowly, but just as surely. For vertebrates, that average is only a few million years. For mammals like us, it's even shorter, roughly 1 million. Long enough for mountains to rise and fall, for rivers to carve their valleys, but not long enough to last forever. Why isn't the Earth teeming with creatures that have endured unchanged since the dawn of life? Why are there no ancient, immortal species still walking among us, unchanged since the Cambrian seas? The truth is, the forces that create a species also begin dismantling it. It's like a library of life, each species a book with its own story. And for most, only a few pages from the final chapter survive. The shelves are littered with gaps where whole volumes have vanished. Imagine time not as a straight line, but as a vast cosmic calendar. Each square is filled with a brief flourish of life. Here, trilobites. There, giant dragonflies. Over there, enormous ground sloths. Flip forward, and the colors change, the shapes change, the names change. Flip far enough, and whole groups are gone. Their squares faded to nothing. It's tempting to think extinction only happens in moments of great violence. A meteor strike, a volcanic apocalypse, some Hollywood-ready cataclysm. And yes, those happen. But most timers wind down slowly, quietly, through an accumulation of challenges. Environmental shifts, competitors gaining an edge, the slow rust of the genome itself. Some species fade away in the background without ever making headlines. You glance back at the skeleton's eye sockets, hollow, but oddly expressive. It's a fossilized reminder that evolution's masterpiece, any masterpiece, has no permanent warranty. Every advantage a species evolves comes with an expiration date, whether it's a sharper tooth, a faster sprint, or the ability to digest an unusual seed. Conditions change. Competitors adapt. Predators get faster. Parasites learn new tricks. The hidden timer isn't a villain. It's a byproduct of the way life works. Every lineage is engaged in a gauntlet of trials, and the only way to win is to keep running them indefinitely. But the course changes, the obstacles shift, and eventually something trips you up. It could be sudden, or it could be the slow tightening of circumstances, the narrowing of options until there's nowhere left to go. Historians still argue whether certain disappearances, like that of the Neanderthals, were inevitable or the result of unlucky collisions with environmental change and competition. Science offers evidence in both directions, but the pattern remains. No species escapes the eventual toll. The mood here in the fossil hall is deceptively serene. Outside these walls, life is a churning, restless engine, each organism part of an immense, interconnected machine. And somewhere, the spring that winds the timer is turning. You can almost hear it in the hush, a faint click between the echoes of your footsteps. To understand why it's there at all, why the timer begins winding the instant a species takes its first breath, you have to leave the still air of the museum behind. Step out into a stranger landscape, one that doesn't belong to any single time or place, but to an idea. Out there, the air is thin and red, the ground flat and endless, and every creature you see is running. Running as if their lives depend on it. And they do. The ground beneath your feet crunches like powdered brick. The horizon is an unbroken line, and overhead, the sun glows a deep, unsettling red, as though it has been hanging there far too long. There is no wind, no sound, until you notice movement. Shapes flicker across the plain. An antelope-like creature bursts from the haze, its muscles taut and trembling, breath streaming in the crimson light. Behind it, a predator follows, low and swift, each stride closing the gap. It takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. The phrase drifts into your mind like a half-remembered dream, and you realize it's not just poetic. It's the law here. This is the Red Queen's realm, pulled straight from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. The Red Queen's race isn't about winning. It's about running hard enough that you don't slide backward into oblivion. Evolution, you see, is not a ladder towards some shimmering pinnacle. It's not about getting better in any final sense. It's an arms race. The antelope evolves longer legs, a keener ear for the faintest rustle. The predator evolves longer strides, sharper teeth, a faster heart. The parasite develops a way to slip past a host's immune system. The host evolves a new barrier, a lock to keep the intruder out. And the moment one side stops moving, stops updating, it's game over. Think of it like your phone's operating system. Every update patches vulnerabilities, improves functions, maybe adds a shiny new feature. Skip enough updates, and suddenly the apps stop working, malware slips in, and the whole system crashes. For species, those updates are genetic changes, mutations, recombinations, subtle shifts passed on to the next generation. No updates, no future. The race has no finish line, no medals, no standing ovations. You just keep running. Climate shifts. You adapt your coat, your diet, your behavior. New predator? You sharpen your senses, change your breeding season, learn to be wary of certain shadows. Disease sweeps through, you scramble for immunity in the genetic shuffle. Competitors discover a new food source, you either outcompete them or find a new niche. It's exhausting to think about, and for species, it's exhausting to live. Even perfect doesn't work here. A perfectly efficient predator would devour every last prey animal, sealing its own fate. A plant flawlessly tuned to a particular climate would flourish, right up until the weather patterns shift and its perfection becomes useless. The Red Queen tolerates no permanent winners. The timer we began with in the fossil hall is, in part, a measure of how long a species can keep running before it falters. Sometimes the end is dramatic, a stumble in plain view. Other times, it's a gradual slowing, a barely noticeable lag until, quietly, another takes its place. Historians still argue whether certain ancient collapses were because the runner tripped or because the track itself shifted beneath them. The disappearance of the saber-toothed cats, for example, was it because they couldn't adapt to dwindling prey, or because climate change rearranged the entire playing field faster than their paws could keep pace? You crouch low to watch the chase unfold on this blood-colored plain. The antelope veers sharply, hooves cutting into the dust. The predator adjusts instantly, muscles coiling like springs, the gap closing again. It's mesmerizing, but you realize the race isn't just here in front of you. It's everywhere. The grass itself is running, evolving toxins to keep from being eaten. The bacteria in the soil are running, tweaking their defenses against viral invaders. Somewhere, in a drop of water, single-celled organisms are locked in their own microscopic sprints. The sound here isn't footfalls, it's the heartbeat of constant adaptation, the drum that keeps time for life's dance. You feel the weight of it. There's no resting bench, no half-time. A species that pauses is already losing. Even the so-called living fossils you'll meet later have been running, just more slowly, conserving energy in the safest corner they can find. It's tempting to admire the elegance of this system, nature's way of making sure nothing gets complacent. But it's also merciless. You don't get to retire, and when you finally can't keep up, the timer's hands sweep forward to midnight. Off in the distance, you see the predator close in, a blur of muscle and dust. The antelope makes one last desperate leap, but this time, the leap is shorter than it needed to be. The timer for that unlucky individual runs out in the snap of a jaw. For the species, though, the race goes on. For now. But here's the thing. None of these runners exist alone. Tug at one strand, and you feel the pull on another. If a runner falls, it might take a partner with it. Sometimes right away, sometimes years later, like an aftershock. And that's where the plain begins to dissolve, its red dust curling into mist. Through it, you see the shapes of trees, but they shimmer like glass. Shadows of animals move between them, half there, half gone. It's not the arena of the Red Queen anymore. You've stepped into another layer of the timer's mechanism, a world where survival is never truly solitary. The red plain breathes out and becomes a forest of glass. Trunks shimmer as if carved from ice. Leaves are pale and translucent. The animals that move between them seem present and absent at once, like fingerprints on fogged glass. You step carefully. Here, nothing stands alone. Threads run between things, root to fungus, flower to bee, grazer to predator. When one thread snaps, you don't just lose a leaf, you feel the whole branch twitch. This is the world of co-extinction. You can think of every species as running its own Red Queen race, but many are running three-legged. to a partner. A bee that insists on one kind of flower. A flower that insists on one kind of bee. A fungus that plugs into a tree's roots and trades sugars for phosphorus like a diminutive merchant guild. A snail that rides a fish's gills to reach the next stream. Pull one, and the other stumbles. Sometimes they both fall. In the undergrowth, a shadow passes. Broad-winged, heavy-bodied, a hunter built for power. You look up and feel the presence of a ghost. The Haast's eagle of Aotearoa, New Zealand. The largest eagle known to science, with talons like a tiger's paw. Its life once orbited a single sun, the giant flightless moa. When Polynesian settlers hunted moa to oblivion within a few centuries of their arrival, the eagle's timer blew through its last grains almost at once. A specialist without its specialty has no plan B. If you ever needed an argument for cross-training, there it is. The historical fact is plain enough. By the early 1400s, MOA were gone, and not long after, so was the Haast's eagle. Radiocarbon dates on bones and middens draw the timeline as neatly as chalk lines on a field. Scientific evidence tightens the picture. Cut-marked moa bones in cooking pits and isotopic signatures in eagle remains that show a diet tied almost exclusively to those giant birds. When the food pyramid lost its base, the apex toppled like a crown with no head beneath it. Walk deeper, and you feel the floor softening underfoot, roots and filaments knotted together. The trees are partnered with mycorrhizal fungi, a living internet whispering nutrients and signals from trunk to trunk. It isn't mystical. It's plumbing with chemistry. A shaded sapling taps its subterranean credit line, sugar borrowed on favorable terms. A drought-stressed elder broadcasts warnings no louder than a molecule. Quirky tidbit. Some orchids are so picky they will not germinate unless one specific fungus shows up to play wet nurse, which is either romantic or ridiculous, depending on whether you've ever tried to keep an orchid alive. You pause at a flower that's gaudy in all the ways a bee might love. Ultraviolet runway stripes, nectar the exact sweetness a pollinator prefers. The plant bets its future on a single courier service. It's efficient until the courier company goes out of business. When a pollinator disappears, seeds don't set, fruits fail, and the plant's timer accelerates. There's scientific evidence for that, too. Pollen records in lake sediments thinning after pollinator crashes. Fruit set experiments that fizzle when the usual bee never arrives. Historians still argue whether particular historical orchard failures were due to weather or the quiet collapse of local bee guilds. Either way, the result is the same. Empty branches and an ache where sweetness should have been. Sometimes the connection is less obvious. A predator keeps an herbivore nervous and moving, which prevents it from razing the same meadow to dirt. Remove the predator, and the herbivore settles in like a couch potato with a fresh season of television and no one to remind it about chores. Grassland becomes mud. Mud becomes gullies. The stream fills with silt. The fish lose their spawning beds. Nobody planned it, yet everyone pays for it. You reach a clearing and find a Jenga tower built of bones, seeds, shells, and little glints of beetle wing. You take a block, a small island rail, say, and at first nothing happens. You take another, its favorite coastal shrub. Still fine. You get bold. Everyone gets bold at Jenga, and tug free a keystone predator that you swear the tower can live without. The structure sighs. Pieces above begin to tilt. It doesn't fall at once. It never looks dramatic until the moment everything is crooked enough that even a breath is a shove. If your weekly game night needs a theme, Jenga, but with ecosystems, is a terrible party idea. Modern life is full of those pulls. Overfishing knocks out big sharks, rays surge, scallops that rays love to crush plummet. Coastal communities find an empty plate where dinner used to be. Introduced rats hop off ships and discover island birds that have forgotten how to be afraid. Eggs and chicks vanish, and with them the trees that relied on those birds to carry seeds uphill into light. Zebra mussels filter lakes until the water is glassy and wrong. The clarity looks pretty until you realize the native plankton are gone, and the fish that ate them are starving quietly, out of sight. And it isn't only food. Parasites lose hosts. Barnacles lose whale bellies. A butterfly vanishes from a meadow, and the ants that once tended its larvae lose their seasonal sugar windfall. Even shelter has a timer. Reef fish that hide in elkhorn coral become homeless when warming seas bleach the coral to a brittle white rib cage. Co-extinction is a shadow economy, loss compounded with interest. You remember the museum hush, and that not quite famous skeleton. How many ghosts might follow it? A feather louse that knew only the warmth beneath that species' wing. A mite that spent its entire existence in a single nostril architecture, a specialized gut bacterium whose empire never extended beyond one host's intestine. Fringe tidbit. Natural history drawers hold parasites pinned beside hosts that no longer exist. Tiny epilogues to larger disappearances, epilogues so small that most visitors never see them. Of course, not every story is as neat as plant dies because pollinator dies. Biology loves loopholes. Some plants maintain backup strategies. They self-pollinate in a pinch or switch to wind if the bees ghost them. Some parasites jump hosts with gymnastic indifference, and some classic co-extinction tales wobble under new data. You think of the often repeated claim that a Mauritian tree stopped germinating when the dodo vanished, its seeds allegedly needing a dodo's gizzard tumbler. Historians still argue whether that story is accurate or a tidy myth. Experiments suggest other animals, and even simple abrasion, can crack the seed coat. The ghost is instructive regardless. Whether or not the dodo was essential to that tree, many plants really do rely on a single disperser, and when that courier's clock strikes midnight, the forest's inbox fills with undelivered seeds. In the distance, surf hammers rock, and for a moment the glass forest refracts into wave and foam. You glimpse a kelp forest, otters threading through ribbons of olive green, and then a coastline stripped to stubble, where otters have been hunted out. Sea urchins chewing through kelp like living lawnmowers. Remove one furry hinge, and a whole door swings open to emptiness. Scientific measurements there are painfully tangible. Fewer kelp fronds per square meter, fewer nursery spaces for fish, fewer birds working the waterline. The arithmetic of absence. Humans don't just tug at blocks, they yank. Habitat converted, predators removed, travelers ferried to islands that never invited them. We don't do this with malice most of the time. We do it because we are good at surviving and prefer our food and buildings and roads where we want them. But the ghost forest keeps a ledger. Pollinators thin and orchards go mute. Reef builders bleach and coastlines lose their storm shield. The timer for one species begins running faster, and the timers of its partners hear the change in tempo and start running too. In this forest, the HR department for bees and flowers must be chaos. Every position is mission critical. You kneel and press your hand to the soil. The threads are there, warm beneath your palm, pulsing with trades and favors and old debts. The clock is there too, a faint tick hiding in the barter. It doesn't hate you. It doesn't love you. It just counts, steadily, while partnerships keep each other upright. But not all clocks are wound from the outside. Some are hidden in the blueprint itself, in letters and errors and little accidents that ride from parent to child like thieves tucked into heirloom trunks. You stand, and the glass leaves fade to strands, curling into a double helix that rises around you like a staircase. The forest's threads are still in your fingertips, but now you feel a new texture. Grainy, flawed, imperfectly copied. The most dangerous enemy can be the one written into your code. The double helix coils upward around you like a spiral staircase built from light and shadow, each rung a base pair, each twist a memory older than bone. You place your hand on one of the smooth rails and feel it hum, familiar, almost comforting. This is DNA, the blueprint of life, passed from generation to generation with a dedication that borders on obsession. And yet, as you climb, you notice small pock marks, tiny chips, faint hairline cracks in the structure. The rail isn't as perfect as it looked from a distance. This is the rust of the genome. Every copy of DNA is like a transcription of an ancient manuscript. Painstaking, meticulous, but never flawless. A letter gets smudged. A word is misspelled. A line gets skipped and then accidentally doubled. In biology, those errors are mutations. Most are harmless. Some are even beneficial. A stronger shell, a better enzyme, a taste for a new kind of leaf. But others are little grains of sand in the gears. They don't stop the machine outright. They just make it run a little less smoothly. In a big, healthy population, those harmful mutations are usually weeded out. Natural selection spots the weaker individuals before the flaw spreads too widely. But when the population shrinks, the rules change. In the lottery of reproduction, chance takes the wheel. Geneticists call this genetic drift, but you can think of it as shuffling a much smaller deck of cards. Here's the analogy. Imagine a bag with 100 marbles, 95 red, good genes, and 5 blue, harmful ones. If you draw 100 marbles to make the next generation, the ratios stay about the same. But if the population is tiny, say you only draw 10 marbles, by pure chance you might end up with 2 blue marbles instead of 5 out of 100. That's 20% harmful genes in one generation. In small isolated groups, those blue marbles start piling up. This is the inbreeding vortex. With fewer unrelated partners to choose from, individuals are more likely to mate with relatives, doubling down on the odds of harmful genes pairing up. Fertility drops. Immune systems weaken. The ability to adapt shrinks. And the worst part? From the outside, everything can look fine. Until suddenly, it's not. Fringe tidbit. Cheetahs, those sleek sprinters of the savannah, are so genetically similar to one another that you could graft skin from one cheetah to another, and it wouldn't be rejected. It's impressive in a sci-fi sort of way, but it's also a genetic red flag. That kind of homogeneity means if a disease finds a weakness in one cheetah, it could cut through the entire population like identical dominoes. Historians still argue whether certain ancient collapses, like that of the Neolithic European aurochs, were mostly due to human hunting or to this creeping genetic fragility. The archaeological record shows both. Spear points lodged in ribs, yes, but also skeletal deformities hinting at inbreeding before the last herds vanished. Scientific evidence makes the genome rot more than just a metaphor. Modern sequencing lets us compare the DNA of long-extinct animals to healthier ancestors. In several cases, Ice Age bison, island foxes, even cave lions, later populations show a rise in broken genes, missing sequences, inactive smell receptors, defective immune system components. These are the small, silent ticks of an internal clock, counting down from within. You pause on the staircase, looking down. The rungs below you are clean and strong, but as your gaze climbs upward, they look more frayed, more uneven. The errors don't come all at once. They accumulate, like corrosion on an old coin. Sometimes the damage is slow enough that a species can limp along for centuries. But isolation is a ruthless accomplice. When a population is trapped, on an island, in a shrinking forest, in a fenced reserve, the genetic rust can accelerate. The very sanctuary meant to protect them becomes a locked room where the air grows stale. And it isn't always a rare or fragile species that suffers. Even common animals can tip into the vortex if their numbers crash sharply. That's why conservationists scramble to relocate individuals between isolated groups, mixing the marbles in the bag again before the blues dominate. It's a race against an enemy you can't see without a microscope. You run your hand along a cracked section of the helix, and it crumbles slightly under your touch, dusting your fingers with motes of light. This is what extinction can look like from the inside. Not a meteor strike, not a predator's teeth, but a slow unraveling of the instructions for making more of yourself. And sometimes there's no dramatic collapse, just a species growing weaker, producing fewer young, until one year, there are no births at all. The silence that follows is absolute. The staircase narrows, and ahead you see a bright, cold opening. The air smells of salt and ice. You step out onto a lonely shore where the sea is grey and the wind carries the faint scent of tundra flowers. Somewhere inland, you hear the rumble of large bodies moving slowly over frozen ground. In the distance, dark shapes graze on sparse vegetation. They look familiar. Tusks, humped shoulders, a silhouette straight from Ice Age murals. But something is off. Their fur is patchy, their gait uneven. These are the last woolly mammoths, exiled on a far northern island, and their clock is almost at zero. The wind off the Arctic Ocean tastes faintly of salt and snowmelt. Wrangel Island rises low and spare from the water, its hills brushed with wiry grass and pale wildflowers clinging to the short summer. Out on the plain, the shapes move slowly. Humped shoulders, shaggy coats, long curved tusks that glint like ivory scythes in the pale light. They are unmistakable. Mammoths. But these aren't the titans you've seen in Ice Age murals or museum dioramas. They are smaller. Some have coats with an odd satin sheen, as if spun from mismatched yarn. Others stumble in a way that makes you wince, like watching a tired elder misjudge a step. It's 2000 BC, and you are watching the last herd of woolly mammoths on Earth. Once, their range spanned from Spain's meadows to Canada's prairies, grazing the vast mammoth steppe alongside bison, musk ox, and cave lions. They survived ice ages and interglacials, predators and human hunters. But when the glaciers melted and the seas rose, their habitat fractured. By around 10,000 years ago, the mainland herds were gone. Wrangel Island, cut off from Siberia by flooding seas, became their final refuge. For another 6,000 years, they endured here, hidden from the rest of the world. Legends among some Siberian peoples tell of earth deer that lived underground and died instantly if they saw the sun. Likely folk memories of mammoth bones surfacing from permafrost. A charming theory, though it suggests mammoths had a worse reaction to daylight than most teenagers. When scientists sequenced the genomes of Wrangell mammoths and compared them to healthier mainland ancestors, the results were sobering. This was a population in the grip of full-blown genome rot. Key genes for smell were broken, leaving them unable to properly identify food or detect predators. Genes tied to fertility were damaged, meaning fewer calves survived. A mutation had likely altered the structure of their coats, giving some that odd satin texture. And the genes that managed insulin were faulty, possibly causing a mammoth version of diabetes, slow metabolism, energy mismanagement, weakness. Quirky tidbit: one of these mutations gave their urine a sweet smell, which, if noticed by predators, could have been like ringing a dinner bell. Imagine being stalked because you smell like dessert. From the outside, they still looked like mammoths, but inside, their DNA was unraveling. With so few individuals, probably no more than a few hundred, the harmful mutations piled up. This is the inbreeding vortex in its cruelest form. The smaller the population, the faster the spiral. Scientific evidence doesn't just come from bones. Researchers found broken olfactory receptor genes, defective keratin genes for hair structure, and even non-functional genes for proteins that should protect sperm cells. It's as if a whole toolkit was missing the handles, the blades dulled. Historians still argue whether humans ever reached Wrangell before these mammoths vanished. Arctic hunter-gatherers roamed nearby coasts, but archaeological proof of contact is scarce. If people did arrive, they may have found the herds already weakened, timers running down from the inside. Picture their final centuries: short summers with sparse forage, winters of grinding ice, bodies slowing under the weight of genetic baggage. Calves fewer each year, elders outlasting their usefulness, and no fresh blood to reset the deck. Then, one year, there's no calf at all. The silence that follows is not sudden. It's the slow dimming of a lantern until darkness takes the room. In the museum of your mind, their skeletons might stand proud, but on Wrangell's tundra, the end was quieter than a meteor strike or volcanic roar. It was extinction by accumulation, 1,000 paper cuts to the genome until the body could no longer hold itself together. You look back across the strait toward the mainland. For some species, like the Wrangell mammoths, isolation was a death sentence. For others, the arrival of a stranger from far away will be the blow that starts the countdown. When the barrier between worlds drops, the race changes. New competitors, new predators, new rules. The air around you warms. The ice softens into mud, and under your boots, a path begins to rise from the water. A bridge of land linking two continents for the first time in millions of years. On the far side, you see unfamiliar shapes gathering. Claws sharper, teeth longer, bodies built for a race the locals have never run. The newcomers are coming, and they won't be polite about it. The land bridge stretches before you like a long, low spine of earth, wet from tides but walkable, flecked with wind-blown grass and patches of exposed sand. To your left, the Pacific yawns wide. To your right, the Atlantic gleams under a pale sky. Animals move along this narrow corridor, some hesitant, sniffing the air, others pressing forward as if propelled by an invisible current. You've arrived at the scene of the Great American Interchange, roughly 3 million years ago. For eons, North and South America lived separate lives, their animals evolving in isolation. In the north, placental mammals, toughened by Ice Age rhythms and fierce predator-prey arms races. In the south, marsupial predators and unique giants like glyptodonts and ground sloths, ruling their own evolutionary kingdoms. When the Isthmus of Panama rose from the sea, it didn't just connect land, it opened a floodgate. From the north came saber-toothed cats, short-faced bears, camels, horses, and wolves. From the south went armadillos, opossums, porcupines, and terror birds. The crossings were not equal in their consequences. The North American arrivals, forged in a faster Red Queen race, often outcompeted the southern natives. Saber-toothed cats brought hunting skills the local marsupials couldn't match. Short-faced bears could chase prey for miles. Even the herbivores, horses, deer, ate in ways that reshaped the southern vegetation, displacing native grazers. Many of South America's unique predators vanished within a geological blink. Scientific evidence from fossil sites like the Tarija Basin in Bolivia and the La Brea tar pits in California records this great reshuffling. Northern predators appearing in the south strata, southern armadillos and giant sloths trudging northward into unfamiliar winters. Some adapted, others didn't. Think of an ecosystem as a finely tuned orchestra, every species playing its part, tempos and harmonies balanced over millennia. An invasive species is like a new musician barging in with a brass tuba and playing an entirely different tune, loudly, off-tempo, and without stopping. The balance shatters. It doesn't always take a land bridge. Sometimes it's a single ship, and the stowaways are smaller than your thumb. Polynesian rats hopping off canoes onto islands full of flightless birds. European rabbits loosed in Australia, multiplying into ecological earthquakes. Zebra mussels hitching rides in ballast water, turning lakes into filtered deserts. Historians still argue whether the terror birds of South America, giant, flightless predators, succumbed directly to northern competition or were already in decline due to climate shifts. The debate changes the details, but not the outcome. The clock for those towering hunters hit midnight, not long after the land bridge opened. And competition isn't only about tooth and claw. It can be as simple as one plant growing faster than another, shading it out, monopolizing water. A new grass with deep roots arrives, and suddenly the shallow-rooted native plants can't drink, or a foreign insect carries a fungus that local trees have no defense against. One organism's harmless companion becomes another's plague. Quirky tidbit. The brown tree snake, accidentally introduced to Guam in the mid-20th century, has wiped out nearly every native forest bird there. People now have to use airdrop operations, literally parachuting dead mice laced with acetaminophen to curb the snakes. Imagine explaining that budget line in a meeting. Scientific records show the speed of these changes, bird counts crashing within decades, plant diversity shrinking in half a human lifetime, reef fish communities overturned in under 10 years after a new predator arrives. This is extinction with the tempo turned up, fast enough to watch in real time. And sometimes the invader is family. A close relative, adapted just differently enough to be a better fit for the moment's conditions. When that happens, the challenge isn't just survival. It's the slow transformation into something unrecognizable to your ancestors. That's not always failure. Sometimes it's the quiet, paradoxical success of becoming something else entirely. The land bridge dissolves beneath your feet, its grasses curling into the rippling segments of a fossilized trilobite. You see it crawl through shallow water, unchanged for thousands of generations, until, slowly, subtly, it isn't the same creature anymore. Its tail is different, its eyes are different. You lean closer and wonder, at what point did it stop being what it was and become something new? The trilobite inches forward across the ancient seabed, tiny legs stirring puffs of silt. It doesn't know it's about to become a philosophical problem. Its tail segments shift shape so subtly that you'd never notice unless you were watching for millennia. Its eye ridges change, plates smooth or gain spines. At some point, this isn't the same species you started with. But where's the line? This is pseudoextinction, also called anagenesis, when a species doesn't vanish in a sudden collapse, but evolves so completely that biologists draw a new nameplate for it. The original form is, by definition, extinct, even though the lineage survives. It's the ship of Theseus in biological form. Replace the planks of a ship, one by one, and ask yourself, is it still the same ship at the end? Replace the genes in a population, one mutation at a time, and at what point are you no longer looking at the same species? Scientific evidence for this comes from the fossil record, where a continuous line of remains shifts over layers of rock. Trilobite species that morph gradually into new ones without a sudden break. Early horses changing tooth shape and body size as grasslands spread, until their great-great-great-grandchildren wouldn't recognize them as kin. Historians still argue about how often this happens versus the more dramatic, true extinction events. Is the fossil gap real or just a failure of preservation? The debate is partly academic, but the philosophical weight is heavy. What does extinct even mean if you can change into something else and keep going? You watch the trilobite's shell grow sleeker, its tail fan broader, until the creature before you feels like a cousin, not a sibling, of the one you saw minutes or millennia ago. The old species timer has hit 0, but the lineage's race continues under a new number. Quirky tidbit. Some paleontologists joke that pseudo-extinction is just rebranding, like when a company changes its logo and insists it's still the same business. Nature is full of these quiet rebrands. The dinosaurs that weren't wiped out by the asteroid evolved into birds. Technically, non-avian dinosaurs are extinct. Practically, their descendants wake you up every morning by yelling outside your window. The metaphor that fits best is a river. Stand in the shallows and let the water swirl around your ankles. It's one river, but the molecules you touch now are gone a moment later, replaced by new ones. Step back in tomorrow, and it's the same river in name only. In evolutionary terms, pseudo-extinction is the cleanest ending a species can get. There's no stumble, no fall behind in the Red Queen's race, no predator closing in. It's the quiet satisfaction of changing just enough to stay in the game. But even here, the timer still runs for the original form. Scientific dating techniques, from radiometric clocks in volcanic ash to isotope ratios in fossilized teeth, let us trace these transformations. We can measure when the old form stopped showing up in the strata, and when the new one became common. It's a reminder that the boundary between extinction and survival is sometimes just a matter of definition. You glance up from the trilobite, and the seabed beneath it begins to buckle and shift. The floor rises into jagged ridges, water draining away as continents grind against one another. Mountains spear the horizon. Valleys gape open. The air itself changes flavor. The stage has been rebuilt, and every actor on it has to adapt their role, or exit the play. Historians still argue which is the greater driver of extinction: competition, climate, or the slow rearrangement of the continents themselves. But here, as the ground under your feet creaks like the hull of a ship, you feel the deep time truth. Even the most adaptable river can't flow the same way when the land it runs over is pulled apart and folded into new shapes. You brace yourself as the rumble deepens. The tectonic plates beneath you are shifting, slow as glaciers, but strong enough to raise whole mountain ranges. The air thins. Somewhere in the distance, seas drain from one basin and rush into another. And somewhere else entirely, a once stable habitat is twisting into something unfamiliar, its residents faced with a choice: adapt, move, or vanish. The ground steadies just long enough for you to see the view from far above. The continents sprawl beneath you like puzzle pieces, but they're not locked in place. They drift, collide, and tear apart at a pace so slow you could almost mistake it for stillness. Almost. Over millions of years, that stillness is an illusion. The stage on which life performs is constantly being rebuilt, and the set changes can be brutal. Below, you watch India drifting north across the Tethys Sea, a lonely island continent on a collision course with Asia. When it finally slams home, the seafloor buckles and lifts into the Himalayas. So high they snag the jet stream and rewrite weather patterns for half the planet. Species once adapted to warm lowlands find themselves in new, freezing highlands, or on the wrong side of monsoon rains. Shift your gaze south. The opening of the Drake Passage between South America and Antarctica reroutes ocean currents, isolating the southern continent and plunging it into its deep freeze. Antarctica's forests shrivel into tundra, then vanish under an ice sheet. What lived there before has two options: leave or die. Scientific evidence for these changes lies in the rocks. Magnetic stripes on the seafloor, marking the birth of new crust as plates pull apart. Fossils of tropical plants high in the Alps, layers of glacial debris where coral reefs once grew. The slow march of plate tectonics is written into the bones of the Earth. Historians still argue whether the great evolutionary radiations, like the burst of mammal diversity after the dinosaurs, are driven more by these shifting continents or by the disasters that sometimes accompany them. Did the new landscapes create opportunities, or were they merely the cleanup crew after catastrophe? You drift lower and see the coastline of a shallow sea retreating. Ice ages lock up vast amounts of water in glaciers, dropping sea levels and exposing wide continental shelves. Land bridges form, letting animals wander into territories they've never seen. Then, as the ice melts, the sea floods back, drowning those same corridors, trapping migrants on islands, and erasing coastal habitats entirely. It's like a homeowner living on a houseboat in a river delta. The land tilts a little more each year, the waterline creeps higher or drops lower, and every adjustment buys only a little time. For some species, the change is gradual enough to adapt to. For others, the geography shifts faster than their biology can keep pace. Quirky tidbit: some ancient marsupials of South America may have first reached Antarctica when it was still forested, then hopped over to Australia before the southern continents drifted into their current icy isolation. Their fossils turn up like forgotten luggage in places they could never survive today. Scientific dating of ancient shorelines shows how quickly habitats can be erased. Coral reefs drowned in a few thousand years during post-glacial sea rise. Inland lakes dried up when mountain ranges shifted the rainfall patterns. Forests gave way to deserts when plate collisions rerouted rivers. From your vantage point, the continents below keep rearranging. Slow, inevitable, impersonal. The hidden timer is ticking for any species that has tied its fate too tightly to one specific landscape. When the land changes, the race begins again on an unfamiliar track. And as you watch, the air around the planet begins to shimmer. Clouds churn in new patterns, snow lines creep downward or vanish entirely. The ground may move slowly, but the sky can change its mind in the space of a few human lifetimes. You descend through a haze that smells of dust and rain, and when your feet touch the ground again, the sun above is fierce. The earth underfoot is cracked and pale. Yet on the horizon, dark clouds are gathering, promising a transformation faster and stranger than the grinding of continents. The cracked earth radiates heat up through your soles, the air shivering in waves. Every breath tastes dry, metallic. Around you, the landscape is a collage of desperate survivors. Thorned shrubs with leaves like pinpricks, lizards basking in the sun's pitiless glare, bones half buried in the dust. Then, with a speed that feels impossible in deep time, the scene begins to shift. The sky dims under the gathering of heavy clouds. A wind from nowhere rattles the brittle branches. When the first drops fall, they strike the ground like coins on a drum. Within decades, mere seconds in geological terms, the land greens into a savanna, grass rippling where there was once only cracked clay. The rivers swell, carving new paths. Herds return. Birds sing in canopies that didn't exist a lifetime ago. This is the fickleness of the sky, the Earth's climate system flipping between states, sometimes with terrifying speed. These are not the slow rearrangements of continents, but abrupt shifts in the thermostat, driven by subtle planetary mechanics. Scientific evidence comes from ice cores in Greenland and Antarctica, thin cylinders of frozen history, each layer a year's worth of snowfall. They show Dansgaard-Eschger events, sudden warmings of up to 8 degrees in as little as a few decades during the last ice age, and Heinrich events, when vast fleets of icebergs broke free from glaciers, freshening and cooling the oceans. Historians still argue about how these shifts unraveled ancient ecosystems. Did cold snaps during the Pleistocene drive whole species to extinction? Or were they simply the last straw for populations already in decline? What's certain is that climate lurches demand quick adjustments. A thick-furred mammal adapted for cold can't wait 100 generations to evolve a sleeker coat if the temperature spikes in a century. The causes are complex. Milankovitch cycles, tiny wobbles in Earth's orbit and tilt, change how sunlight falls on the planet. Ocean currents like the Atlantic Meridional. Overturning circulation, AMOC, can slow or stall, redistributing heat in strange new patterns. Volcanic eruptions can briefly shroud the globe in cooling dust. The regrowth of forests or melting of ice sheets can shift carbon dioxide levels enough to tip the climate into a new equilibrium. Quirky tidbit. Tree rings from bristlecone pines in the American West record the medieval warm period and the Little Ice Age, centuries-long swings that reshaped societies. From Viking colonies in Greenland to the collapse of certain agricultural systems in Asia. These trees are, in a sense, gossiping old witnesses to the sky's mood swings. When the climate flips, it's not just temperature. Rainfall patterns change, turning forests into grasslands or vice versa. Lakes can swell into inland seas or shrink to salty puddles. Migratory routes shift. Plants flower earlier or later. Pollinators miss the rendezvous. Seeds don't set, and the food chain stumbles. Scientific modeling shows that during some abrupt shifts, entire biomes migrated hundreds of kilometers in a few centuries. For species that could move quickly, birds, fish, nomadic mammals. There was hope. For those rooted in place, or hemmed in by mountains and seas, the clock began to tick louder. Historians still argue whether Homo sapiens spread into Europe coincided with climate windows that Neanderthals couldn't adapt to fast enough. Did shifting weather open grass corridors for our prey, giving us the edge? Or was the climate a neutral backdrop to a story driven by competition alone? You feel the air change again. The heat builds in a matter of heartbeats, as though the sky has leaned closer. Then a shadow passes over you, fast, sharp, and growing. This isn't the slow pull of tectonics or the rolling dice of orbital cycles. This is something sudden and final, a blow from above that will reset the timers for almost everyone, all at once. The horizon blooms with a white light that burns through the clouds. In that instant, the fickle sky is no longer moody. It's a weapon. The light on the horizon swells until the sky itself seems to catch fire. You blink, and the scene changes. No longer the parched earth and sudden rains, but a coastline 252 million years ago. The air smells wrong, thick with a sulphurous tang that stings your nose. The sea is unnervingly still, as if it's holding its breath. This is the prelude to the greatest catastrophe life has ever endured, the Permian-Triassic extinction, the Great Dying. Here, the timer for almost every species on Earth is about to hit zero. The world then was a strange one. Proto-mammals with saber-like canines prowled the land, giant amphibians wallowed in swamps, and the seas swarmed with bizarre fish and coiled-shell ammonites. For millions of years, life had flourished under stable conditions. Then, in what would be the most devastating reset in the history of complex organisms, stability shattered. The trigger erupted in what is now Siberia, the Siberian Traps, a volcanic event on a scale that makes modern eruptions look like firecrackers. For hundreds of thousands of years, lava spilled across an area larger than Western Europe. The Earth's crust bled fire. With it came staggering amounts of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide, enough to warp the planet's climate into something unrecognizable. Scientific evidence from ancient rock layers shows the sequence. First, CO2 levels spiked, causing intense global warming. Then acid rain scoured vegetation, stripping the land to raw soil. As the oceans absorbed the excess heat, they began to lose oxygen, a condition called anoxia. In this suffocating water, anaerobic bacteria thrived, releasing hydrogen sulfide gas. That gas bubbled into the air, poisoning land animals and eroding the ozone layer, letting lethal UV radiation pour in. Historians still argue over the exact proportions of these kill mechanisms. Was it primarily the warming, the poisoning, or the collapse of the food web? But the combined assault was unstoppable. Quirky tidbit. In some Permian fossil beds, paleontologists have found perfectly preserved stands of Glossopteris trees, entire groves flash-killed and entombed in volcanic ash, their leaves still attached, as if frozen mid-sway. It's like Pompeii, but for plants. In the oceans, trilobites, ancient survivors of hundreds of millions of years, vanished completely. Coral reefs collapsed, not to return for tens of millions of years. On land, 7 out of 10 vertebrate species disappeared. By the time the eruption ceased, 96% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates were gone. The fossil record shows a stark dividing line. Before, a riot of forms. After, a biological wasteland. Imagine the Red Queen's race not as a track, but as a stadium. The Great Dying was like pulling down the walls, flooding the field, poisoning the air, and turning out the lights. while the runners were still inside. The aftermath was eerily quiet. Recovery took millions of years. Ecosystems rebuilt themselves slowly, tentatively, with new players rising from the few that had survived. The very rules of the game had shifted. The dominant lineages before the extinction never regained their old place. The timer for life on Earth had been almost completely wound back to zero. Scientific clues, spikes in carbon isotopes, layers of volcanic ash, fossilized microbes from oxygen-starved seas tie the story together. And while the Siberian traps were the main engine, the event reminds us that the timer can run down, not just for a species, but for nearly all species at once. And yet, life persisted. A handful of adaptable, lucky, or simply stubborn lineages made it through. They inherited an empty world, ripe for reinvention. For a while it seemed they might run unchallenged, until 187 million years later, another reset came. But this time, it wouldn't seep up from the Earth's crust. It would fall from the sky in a single, blinding moment. The coastline has changed again. Now it's lush and warm, the air heavy with the scent of cycads and flowering magnolias. Pterosaurs wheel lazily overhead, their wings flickering against a brilliant blue sky. In the understory, small mammals skitter through ferns, avoiding the steady rhythmic tread of giants. A hadrosaur browses in the shade, tearing mouthfuls of leaves with its beak. Somewhere deeper in the forest, a tyrannosaur bellows, a sound so deep you feel it in your ribs. And then you notice it. A new star in the daytime sky, tiny but impossibly bright. It grows as you watch, its light hard and white, its path unflinching. The hadrosaur lifts its head, chewing, forgotten. The tyrannosaur's call cuts off. 66 million years ago, the clock for the non-avian dinosaurs is about to strike midnight. The impactor, a rock or icy body 10 to 15 kilometers across, slams into the shallow sea near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula with the force of billions of atomic bombs. The world changes in seconds. First comes the flash. If you were within hundreds of kilometers, the light and heat alone would kill you instantly, igniting forests, vaporizing anything in the open. Then comes the shock wave, an earthquake so vast it rattles the entire planet. Mega tsunamis hundreds of meters high race away from the impact site, swallowing coasts on multiple continents. But the real killer is in the sky. Trillions of tons of molten rock and pulverized earth are blasted upward, raining down as glassy tektites. The friction heats the atmosphere to oven-like temperatures. Global wildfires erupt, turning continents into embers. Scientific evidence for this sequence is preserved in a thin clay layer found worldwide, enriched in iridium, a metal rare on Earth but common in asteroids. In places like Tanis, North Dakota, fossils capture the very moment. Fish with impact debris in their gills, dinosaurs that died within hours of the strike. Quirky tidbit. Some of those glassy tektites are still found today. Tiny black beads scattered far from the crater, like the planet's own grim confetti. Historians still argue whether the asteroid was the sole cause of the extinction or simply the coup de grace to ecosystems already stressed by massive volcanic eruptions in India's Deccan traps. But the consensus is clear. Without the impact, the age of dinosaurs would likely have lasted much longer. The aftermath is a long, dark winter. Soot from the fires and dust from the impact blot out the sun for months, maybe years. Photosynthesis falters, plants wither, herbivores starve, then carnivores follow. In the oceans, plankton die off, collapsing the food chain from its foundation upward. The survivors are not the mighty, but the small and adaptable, creatures that can hide, endure, and eat almost anything. Crocodiles in rivers, mammals in burrows, birds that can feed on seeds and detritus. The rulers of the Mesozoic are gone, and in their absence, these survivors will inherit the earth. You stand among the smoldering remains of the forest, the air thick with ash and silence. The Red Queen's race is still on, but its caste has been almost entirely replaced overnight. And from one of those small, furtive survivors will come a line of primates, and eventually a species that will learn to measure time itself. The ground under your feet cools. The smell of soot fades. You're sinking, slowly at first, then plunging into darkness, into cold water. Strange shapes drift past. A fish with lobe-like fins, a tree with fan-shaped leaves. Some are survivors from unimaginably deep time. Their designs barely changed while empires of life rose and fell above them. These are the ones that seem to have found a way to slow their timers almost to a stop. The water is dark and still, the kind of quiet that feels almost pre-human. Older than birdsong, older than the shape of continents you'd recognize. From the gloom, a shape emerges. A fish the color of deep cobalt, its body fringed with lobe-like fins that look more like limbs than paddles. It moves with the slow grace of something that has no intention of hurrying. This is a coelacanth, a creature whose lineage is more than 400 million years old. Scientists thought it had been gone since the Cretaceous, known only from fossils. Then, in 1938, a South African trawler hauled one up, very much alive, looking as if it had swum straight out of prehistory and into the modern world. You follow it deeper, into a realm of cold currents and eternal night, where change comes slowly. Here, the timer seems to run differently. Living fossils, as they're often called, are species whose outward forms have remained remarkably similar over immense spans of time. The ginkgo tree, with its unique fan-shaped leaves, has been growing almost unchanged for over 200 million years. Fossil ginkgo leaves could be swapped with modern ones, and most people wouldn't notice the difference. Scientific evidence points to a few shared advantages among these marathon survivors. Stable environments. Coelacanths dwell in deep-sea caves where temperature and light barely change from century to century. Ginkgo trees once ranged across continents, but found lasting refuge in pockets of East Asia where climates stayed relatively mild. Stability buys time. Generalist lifestyles. They aren't overly picky about food or conditions. Ginkgo trees tolerate pollution and poor soils. Coelacanths eat a variety of fish and squid. A jack-of-all-trades doesn't win every race, but it can keep running long after specialists stumble. Slow metabolism and reproduction. Coelacanths can live over 50 years, with pregnancies lasting more than a year. Ginkgos take decades to mature. In a world that's constantly changing, going slow can sometimes be an advantage. Fewer generations mean fewer opportunities for harmful mutations to take over. Sheer luck. Avoiding the worst of history's disasters is sometimes about nothing more than being in the right place when catastrophe strikes. The asteroid that killed the dinosaurs didn't trouble the deep-sea caves of coelacanths or the sheltered valleys where ginkgos grew. Quirky tidbit. Ginkgo trees drop seeds encased in a fleshy coat that smells powerfully. Some say offensively, like rancid butter when ripe. It's thought this odor once attracted now extinct seed-dispersing animals. Today, the stench mainly repels pedestrians and fascinates botanists. Historians still argue whether the term living fossil is a misleading label. These species haven't been frozen in time. They've evolved, but slowly, and in ways that don't show much in their appearance. The coelacanth's internal anatomy, for example, includes a unique hinged skull joint not found in its fossil relatives, suggesting subtle but important changes over the ages. These survivors demonstrate that the Red Queen's race isn't always about sprinting. Sometimes it's about finding a lane no one else runs in and strolling it at your own pace. In their quiet corners, deep caves, protected valleys, they've outlasted ice ages, mass extinctions, and the rise and fall of entire ecosystems. But humans are different. We didn't find a quiet corner. We ran onto every track, in every stadium, and then began redesigning the race itself. We insulated ourselves from cold with fire and clothing, from hunger with farming, from disease with medicine. We rewrote the terms that govern every other species timer. The water around you grows warmer, shallower. The shadow of the coelacanth drifts away, replaced by another shadow, your own. On the bank, a tree with fan-shaped leaves sways in a warm breeze, but behind it, you see a reflection in water. Not just your face, but a long procession of faces. Homo erectus, Neanderthal, Homo habilis, stretching back through time. You've reached the point in the story where the runner is you. You stand at the water's edge, staring at your own reflection. Behind it, layered like ghostly transparencies, are the faces of your ancestors. Homo erectus with a long, low skull. Neanderthals with broad noses and heavy brows. Homo habilis with curious, intelligent eyes. Each one looks forward, as if passing you an unspoken challenge. Run the race differently. And you did. Where other species relied on slow genetic change, you learned to shortcut the process. Language gave you a way to share information so precisely that an idea could leap from one mind to another without waiting for generations to pass. You didn't need to evolve claws. You could teach a child to nap a spearhead before they were tall enough to throw it. This was the cognitive revolution, and it rewrote the Red Queen's rules. Cooperation grew beyond the family group. Bands became tribes. Tribes became networks, trading not just goods, but stories, skills, and strategies. Knowledge could accumulate, turning into a collective memory far older than any individual. Scientific evidence of this leap is etched in the archaeological record. Suddenly, around 70,000 years ago, symbolic artifacts appear. Beads carved from ostrich eggshell, ochre etched with abstract designs, bone flutes playing notes no bird ever sang. These weren't just tools, they were messages across time. You didn't stop there. The mastery of fire and the making of clothes let you expand into climates that would have been lethal for a naked ape. Agriculture allowed you to settle, store food, and grow populations beyond what hunting alone could support. Medicine, rudimentary at first, then increasingly sophisticated, blunted the blows of disease and injury that would have felled other species without ceremony. Historians still argue about whether these shifts were gradual or sudden bursts of innovation. Did language emerge in a single evolutionary step, or through a long layering of simpler communication? The debate is academic, but the result is clear. You gained the ability to adapt in years what biology might take millennia to accomplish. Quirky tidbit: the invention of sewing needles, some 40,000 years ago, may have been as crucial to human survival as the control of fire. Warm, fitted clothing opened frigid lands to settlement, And, bonus, you could finally complain about winter fashion. Your adaptability wasn't just cultural, it became geographical. Within a few tens of thousands of years, humans were living in every terrestrial biome: tropical jungles, arid deserts, high mountains, frozen tundras. This global spread gave you resilience no other large animal had. A disaster in one place might wipe out a population, but somewhere else, others would endure. Scientific modeling shows how quickly humans can pivot. In less than 200 years, agricultural techniques spread from the Fertile Crescent into Europe and Asia. In mere decades, seafaring expanded human reach to nearly every island on Earth. Evolution's treadmill became your moving walkway, powered by culture and technology. But there's an irony here. By outrunning the old-timer, you began building a new one. The very tools that insulated you from extinction also multiplied your impact on the world around you. You weren't just another runner in the race. You were redesigning the track, tilting it in your favor and altering it for everyone else. You've learned to stretch the rules, conserving species on the brink, reviving habitats, even contemplating resurrecting extinct creatures from scraps of DNA. Yet every advantage came with unintended consequences. Forests cleared for farms, rivers dammed for power, predators eliminated to protect livestock. Historians still argue whether the first wave of human expansion into new continents triggered massive extinctions, mammoths in the Americas, giant kangaroos in Australia, or whether climate shifts were the main culprits. What's undeniable is that wherever humans arrived, the local clock began to tick faster for many other species. You glance at the ghostly line of ancestors behind you. They ran the Red Queen's race with persistence and ingenuity. You're running it with jetpacks and a global communications network. For now, you seem untouchable by the old rules. But in the quiet between your footsteps, another ticking begins. A sound not of nature's clock, but of one you've built yourself. You rise from the water's edge into the present day, and the earth beneath you glows with the lights of human settlement. From above, it looks like a neural network. Cities as bright nodes, highways as glowing filaments, ships as tiny moving sparks across dark oceans. It's breathtaking, but the light hides as much as it reveals. In the shadows beyond the glow, rainforests have thinned, wetlands have been drained, and grasslands have been carved into geometric grids of farmland. Welcome to the Anthropocene, the age of humans, where the old extinction drivers have been joined by new ones of our own making. The Red Queen's track is still there, but now you control the slope, the obstacles, and, in many cases, the starting gun. The biggest change is speed. Past extinction events, even the sudden ones, unfolded over decades to centuries. Ours moves in years. The primary driver is habitat destruction. Forests cleared for agriculture or timber, rivers rerouted for dams, wetlands filled for cities. For the species that lived there, it's as if their entire world vanished overnight. Scientific evidence from satellite imagery shows the scale. The Amazon losing millions of hectares in a few decades, mangroves vanishing from coasts faster than they can regenerate. For some species, like the orangutan, each patch of lost forest doesn't just shrink their territory, it cuts them off from other groups, pushing them toward that dangerous inbreeding vortex you saw with the Wrangell mammoths. Then there's the globalization of invasive species. Ships, planes, and trade routes are constantly shuffling organisms into ecosystems they would never have reached on their own. A snake from Southeast Asia in Guam, a fungus from Europe on American chestnut trees. a weed from Africa choking Australian rivers. Each new arrival can trigger a chain reaction of displacement and decline. Pollution adds another layer to the timer. Plastics break down into microscopic fragments that enter the food web. Pesticides weaken insect populations that pollinate crops. Fertilizer runoff feeds algal blooms, which die and decay, sucking oxygen from the water and creating dead zones in oceans and lakes. Quirky tidbit. There's a patch of the Pacific Ocean so choked with floating plastic debris, it's been nicknamed the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It's not a solid island you can walk on, more like a soup, but it's roughly twice the size of Texas and growing. And then there's climate change, our most global alteration of the timer. By burning fossil fuels, we've released carbon dioxide at a rate comparable to the outpourings of the Siberian traps, but on a human timescale, not a geological one. The atmosphere warms, ice melts, sea levels rise, and weather patterns skew into unfamiliar shapes. Scientific measurements from ice cores, tree rings, and modern sensors show CO2 levels higher than at any point in at least 800,000 years. Species adapted to stable seasonal patterns now find their cues scrambled. Flowers blooming before pollinators emerge, migratory birds arriving after their food has peaked. Historians still argue whether mass extinction is the right term for what's happening now, since the losses are still uneven across regions. But estimates suggest extinction rates today are 100 to 1,000 times higher than the natural background rate. In effect, we're not just speeding up the clock, we're smashing it with a hammer. The irony is sharp. You're the first species to truly understand the hidden timer, and yet much of your activity accelerates it. You have the tools to slow it down: conservation programs, habitat restoration, climate mitigation, but also the power to strip centuries from another species' lifespan with a single industrial project. From the dark between the glowing cities, you hear the chorus of ticking clocks, some racing, some nearly silent, some already stopped. In the glass cases of the future's museums, the skeletons may come with labels that read, "Extinct Anthropocene," and now you're back in the silent fossil hall where this began. But this time, you know what you're looking at. Not just a relic of the past, but an echo of choices made, races run, and timers that ran out. The difference is that now, for the first time in history, the clock is in your hands. The museum hall greets you with the same cool stillness as before, but it doesn't feel empty now. It feels dense, with meaning, with memory, with the echoes of all the stories you've walked through. The skeleton before you hasn't changed, but you have. You see it not as a static relic, but as the end point of a race it once ran with every breath. Around it, in your mind's eye, the runners you've met drift in and out like after-images. The glass forest's vanished partners, the wrangle mammoths stumbling under their own genome's weight, the trilobite reshaping itself into something new, the forests that froze when continents shifted, the seas emptied by volcanoes and asteroids. You hear the pounding feet on the Red Queen's plain and feel the faint tick of the hidden timer behind every heartbeat. You also see yourself reflected here, not just the individual you standing in the quiet, but your entire species, the one that broke the rules of the game. The first to understand that there is a game. The first to watch the clock, not just run from it. Scientific evidence has been our lantern in this darkness. Ice cores, fossil layers, genomes, pollen grains locked in sediment. From these, we've learned that extinction isn't a rare punctuation in life's story. It's the norm. And survival is the exception. Historians still argue whether humanity will be remembered as a mass extinction event in its own right, or as the species that learned to protect life against the timer. That argument is still in progress, being written in policies, rewilding projects, seed vaults, marine reserves, and, less encouragingly, in clear-cut forests, bleached reefs, and melting ice sheets. Quirky tidbit: the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, nicknamed the Doomsday Vault, holds over 1 million seed samples in a tunnel bored into Arctic rock. It's one of the few places on Earth designed explicitly to cheat the timer, a backup library for the plants that feed us. The question is whether we'll use our knowledge like a craftsman restoring a clock, or like a vandal smashing one. We've broken many timers for other species already. We've also saved some, from California condors to black-footed ferrets, snatching them back from midnight. The ability is there. The choice is ours. And so here in the hush, the philosophical questions linger like whispers. If we've dismantled the old rules, are we building a new timer for ourselves? One that ticks faster than we realize? Are our vast interconnected systems a kind of fragility all their own? What do we owe to the other runners still on the track with us? Someday, far in the future, a geologist may tap a rock layer from this moment in time. What will they find? A thin smear of ash and plastic? A mark of another great die-off? Or signs that the timer slowed, that a species learned not only to run the race, but to keep the lanes open for others? The silence here feels watchful. The fossil in front of you is listening. The timer is still ticking. For the firefly blinking outside your window, for the ancient redwood rooted in fog, and for you. The story of extinction isn't over. We are writing the next chapter right now. The great silence waits to see how it ends. And now, we step away from the clock. Let the echoes fade. Imagine the fossil hall dimming until only a soft amber glow remains, outlining the bones in a warm halo. The air is cool, steady, almost like a held breath, but it's no longer heavy. The ticking you heard before has softened into something slower, gentler, like the faint rhythm of a tide. Outside, night has settled. Picture the city lights muted by distance, the sky above broad and dark, pierced here and there by stars. Some of those stars are already gone, their light only now arriving. Others will shine long after we're dust. The scale is so vast that the timers of species, even whole worlds, feel small in comparison. You walk back through the museum in unhurried steps. Each doorway opens into a quieter space. Each echo fades a little more. Past the exhibits, past the lobby, until you're outside, and the air carries nothing but the cool whisper of evening. The shapes of trees sway softly. A breeze brushes your cheek. Breathe deeply, in and out. Let the timeline shrink from millions of years to this single moment, here, now. You're not running. You're not counting. You're simply part of the stillness, held in it like a leaf in calm water. The story is waiting for tomorrow. Tonight, you can rest. Sweet dreams.